Hey, a couple quick announcements before we get started. Our next book club book will be The Making of Biblical Womanhood by Beth Allison Barr. That'll be episode 30 and is going to be coming out September 15th. So grab yourself a copy. There's a link to buy the book in the show notes. Also, Daniel Wheat, who writes and performs our theme song and most of the other music on our podcast, has just released a great new song on Spotify titled Joy. It's exactly the kind of song this world needs right now. Once again, link in the show notes. Now, on with the show.
And I have been searching.
Welcome to Following the Fire. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the wilderness. Just like Israel followed the pillar of fire and smoke, we want to take a new look at our beliefs and just follow him.
And like Israel, we get it wrong a lot, we get lost a lot, but we're doing our best to go where God leads us. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Steve.
Don't you know it's all I have?
So, Nathan, I didn't get to go to my therapy appointment this past Sunday because I got the COVID booster on Saturday.
Okay.
And I thought I was going to feel great, but I didn't.
Oh, no. It happens again?
Happens again. It wasn't as bad as the second shot because I guess they're just upgrading the 5G instead of just installing it, you know. But so I had to cancel the appointment because I just was not feeling well. Glad I got the booster, though, since I'm autoimmune. Immunocompromised is, I guess, the word.
Right.
So, I'm glad I got it, but so I didn't get my therapy appointment. So, you're going to be my therapy guy today?
Stand in, yeah. I do that at work like once or twice a week, I'd say. So, yeah, I'm good. I'll send you a bill later, and we'll just get going.
I mean, let's be honest. This podcast is half therapy anyway, probably for both of us.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yep.
But the reason I started actually seeing the therapist we're seeing is it's about the third therapist we've seen, is because this person is she actually deals with cancer patients most of the time, and she's absolutely fantastic. And we needed somebody who could get behind and understand the complexities of dealing with chronic illness, the kind of illness that is life-changing and just will not go away. Thankfully, sometimes cancer does go away, but often it doesn't. It's not quite the death sentence it was when I was little. Like, you hear somebody had cancer, just like they'll just write them off, basically. But
right,
but it's a whole different thing. Thinking of how, just understanding how life changes when you have diagnoses like that. And I may have kind of mentioned this in passing in the podcast before about my diagnoses of both young onset Parkinson's disease and later, 2 years later, a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. But I feel like it's kind of time to, I kind of want to talk about it through the lens of how it's impacted my spiritual life. And there's I wrote out a bunch of notes and just kind of a brain dump. I've got a lot of it's hard to find an aspect of my life that this hasn't impacted, which is not surprising. But I'll just kind of get going and stop me and interrupt me. Happy to answer any questions along the way. So I kind of start by telling the story. I'm one of these guys who I'd not gone to the doctor from the time I was in college until the time I was 41 years old.
Yeah.
Basically.
I'm one of those guys.
I never got sick. I mean...
Yeah, you don't... And if I ever have like a nagging thing, it's nagging not very much. And I hate sitting in the doctor describing something while there's nothing wrong with me.
Right.
So if there is like a little thing that happens every now and then.
Yeah, and I know what I need to do. I need to eat better and exercise more. I mean, I'm an American.
That was my reason to not go to therapy too. Is like, I know what I'm doing wrong. I'm not sleeping.
Right.
I'm not eating. I'm not exercising. So
Yeah.
I should just do those.
So I maybe had the flu once through that whole time, and I just really hardly ever got sick of anything at all, other than like allergies and the occasional cold here and there, but nothing doctor level.
Yeah.
So I had recently changed jobs to where I currently work. This has been 2015 or 16 that I moved over there. And I noticed that my left hand was starting to cramp up a lot. And it was really bizarre because I thought, what's going on? So like, it was hard to type, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. I figured it was the new desk. Ergonomics are weird.
Yeah. Yep.
So they got me in a standing up and down desk thing, and I thought that's going to solve it. It didn't solve it. My left arm was still slow and tight and weird. And then I thought, okay, it's the keyboard. So I tried like 3 different ergonomic keyboards. Did not solve it. And I just kept bothering me more and more and more, to the point where I was writing out a sermon one day I was filling in for the preacher at church. And I had to resort to the text to speech option on my computer to capture all my notes, because it was just so hard to type with my left hand. And then I was talking to somebody at church about it, who's a nurse, and I'm like, yeah, it's really weird, and I can't figure out what's going on. She's like, are you having any tremors? I'm like, yes, I am. I didn't realize I was having tremors, but I when she said that, I realized I was.
Right.
And because I think that we don't always pay attention to our bodies and what's going on, and it's especially if something comes along slowly. Yeah. You just don't notice it.
Yeah.
I started getting more and more concerned, and I was noticing when I was teaching class at church, I was having a hard time coming up with words, putting sentences together sometimes. My balance was a bit off, weird stuff. So I went into the doctor and didn't have a doctor, as I previously established. Yeah. And so I looked up, and at this point I was kind of getting a little panicked, because I had called one of the general UC Health line or whatever, and they put me in to talk with a nurse, and I chatted with her for a while, and she's like, I think you need to get into the emergency room. I'm like, what? Because I explained how my left side was slow, and I noticed that my left foot was kind of hard getting into the shoe, and she was afraid that I had a stroke.
Right.
So she wanted me to get in, and that panicked me, and I knew I didn't have a stroke because there was nothing else anyway. So I kind of panicked, and I just, first doctor I could find, and I went in, and I said, got into the doctor and explained everything. She's like, well, I think we need to get you a CT scan. I'm like, what do you think it could be, doc? She's like, don't know. I said, I've got a friend with MS. Could it be MS? Because it's neurological weirdness. And she's like, I don't think it's MS because reasons. And I'm like, okay. So went in for that. Nothing on the CT scan. Went to another neurologist. Couldn't figure it out. And in the meantime, I started noticing that everything I was dealing with was on my left side of my body. Mm-hmm. Nothing on the right, which is good because I'm right-handed. So I started doing what all good Americans do, is diagnose yourself on WebMD. And aside from cancer, which
I was going to say, so cancer, so it said cancer, and also reiterated that you should go to the emergency room.
Right. But everything that I kept coming up with was emphasizing the fact that if things like that start happening on just one side of your body, all signs just kept pointing back to Parkinson's disease. Okay. And I'm like, I'm 41. That's too young.
Yeah.
And then I started thinking about Michael J. Fox, and he was 29 when he got diagnosed. So I wrote up all my, like the nerd I am, I wrote up the timeline of all my symptoms and when they happened, how severe they were. And I went into the neurologist. And by the way, kids listening out there, if there are any kids or parents, your child should be a neurologist because it takes like 6 months to get into a neurologist. I was lucky to get in a little earlier than that because it was like this guy was like in training or something. But boy, there's a super big shortage of neurologists. So anyway, have a job forever. Anyway, so went into the neurologist and I sat down, and by that point it'd been several weeks and my left leg had started tremoring a lot more. And so I was like, my left leg was bouncing up and down, and I explained what was going on, and I handed in my sheet of symptoms. And he's like, so what do you think it is? I said, I think it's Parkinson's disease. He's like, yeah, it's Parkinson's disease. Pretty sure.
Wow. So
that was a hard day. It was like September 25th of 2017. So being a pretty normal dude at 41 getting Parkinson's disease was brutal. It was a super hard shock to the system. Hard for me and my wife both, obviously. It was life-changing, obviously, because for a lot of reasons. And I'm the type of guy who I tend to do lots of stuff, and I like to be active, and so I'm like, I'm going to fight back on this thing.
Yeah.
And so I did a lot of research and found out that there's zero way to slow down Parkinson's disease. There's no cure for it. All that they can do is manage symptoms for Parkinson's. And the average age for Parkinson's disease diagnosis is about 60, 65.
Wow.
And if you are diagnosed before the age of 50, they consider it young onset diagnosis, young onset Parkinson's, which tends to be a slower burn, kind of a slower decline, but it still ends up in the same place in the end. And so here I was with 2 kids, and it's one thing living your life, knowing that you could any day you could stop a bus the hard way.
Yep.
Things could happen. Life is not promised to us, right? But it's a really strange thing to suddenly have some certainty to your future, which, we think that we want certainty to our future. But when you have that certainty, but it's bad news, that's like, it's like, that's rough.
We've talked about that a lot, about how we're all mortal, but the lucky ones of us who don't have some kind of known prognosis, it's so easy for, like, we don't think about what the end is going to look like.
Yeah.
And we don't have to avoid it. It doesn't come for us or anything. It's just, we just don't think about that. But there are, I feel like there are Greek tragedies told about when the hero gets told how his end is going to happen.
Yeah.
The whole story is about them frantically trying to, like, run away from that.
Right.
Because I can't think of any specific stories, but that's just a common human storytelling trope that I think matches that, how difficult it is to actually, like, see that part of your future that most of us ignore,
Yeah. And so that's the weird space that I found myself. Like, there are plenty of unknowns, and I still have those unknowns. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, I have extra. It's like a weird category of known unknowns, because I know, like, how my Parkinson's could progress. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure how it will, but I know it will.
Right.
And so I'll back up a second. So Parkinson's, what it is, I mean, we hear a lot about it. We see Michael J. Fox, on the news a lot, and he's a fantastic advocate. But what it is deep in the center of your brain is kind of the movement center. It's like right above your lizard brain. And there's dopamine cells in the area of your brain. There's dopamine cells in your body all over the place. But the movement center of your brain has tons of dopamine because it's a neurotransmitter that enables movement.
Okay.
And it also, I think the last episode you mentioned how arguing can even give you a dopamine hit. Lots of things give you dopamine hits. It's a reward chemical in your brain, as well as enabling movement, which I didn't know until Parkinson's came along. What happens, and the cause is unknown, and there are some known causes, but why I have Parkinson's, no, we can't figure out for sure. Right. But what happens is these dopamine producing cells in the center of your brain start dying off, and it's like something trips off a cascade event, and they just slowly die off and die off and die off, and your body can't keep up with replacing them, because some neurons do actually regenerate and some don't. But by the time that you start seeing symptoms of this Parkinson's disease, it's probably been 15, maybe even 20 years since it started.
Wow.
By that time, they think about 70 to 80% of your dopamine cells have already died.
Yeah, so the brain's been compensating or like figuring out a way to make this happen.
Yeah.
And the symptoms happen when you reach that threshold of, okay, now it's just not enough for certain things.
Yeah, yeah. So what happens is that over time, as it just keeps dying off more and more and more, the medication that you're given, as I mentioned, is to handle symptoms, which is basically a synthetic dopamine. So I literally am doping up all day long.
Right.
And I take, I counted up the other day, I take like 44 pills a day throughout the day at like 7, 8, 11, 3, 7, and 10 at night.
Yeah, you shared a photo of all the, like, your one day's worth of medications, color coded by what they do, and I just feel like we've talked about this before. This isn't I'm not surprised. I know this about you, but the image stuck in my head just as a symbol of what your day-to-day life is like, basically.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, at this point, it's kind of just standard operating procedure.
Right.
You know? Like right before we started talking, I popped a few pills because it was time to take them, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm constantly replacing the dopamine that my body doesn't have, that my brain doesn't have. And so when you don't have that dopamine, your brain kind of misfires, and it gets into these weird feedback loops, which causes the tremors.
Mm-hmm.
And the lack of movement chemical means, like, my left hand couldn't move very fast. It affects things like I mentioned, speech. When I'm not on the medication, I have serious word finding problems. Like I can't.
So interesting.
Like computer, I can't, like, for example, I'll be like, "Hey, can you turn on the that thing there? I'm looking at it. I know what it is. I can't think of the word." It's so bizarre.
Yeah, it's the like initiation thing
Mm-hmm.
that is connected to movement is also connected to movement of the mind.
It's weird.
Yeah, it's not how I would have guessed it works, you know.
And since dopamine is also a reward chemical, I mean, imagine how your personality would change and how things would change in your life if you had almost no reward chemical for the things you were doing.
Right.
And so you would just, things are different. And so I noticed, I've always been a huge go-getter, do stuff, very active. And I noticed for the years leading up to the diagnosis, I'd become more and more apathetic. I would go to church. I'd like being at church because I'm an extrovert, but I wouldn't want to talk to anybody because it'd be hard to think about what to talk about. And I wouldn't want to interact at all. And I had no motivation to do anything whatsoever. I would just sit around and not do stuff.
Right.
And, I am so thankful for these medications because I feel much more like myself when I'm taking this stuff. Because I have motivation to do podcasts and go on walks and ride my bike and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
So, interestingly, when I went through this with diagnosis, a lot of people expected me to be angry at God. And I really wasn't. I was upset in like at the universe, but I didn't get to the point where I was mad at God. And we actually were seeing a kind of quote unquote Christian therapist, Christy and I, for this purpose, to kind of work through some of this stuff. And she kept wanting us to she's like, it's okay to be mad at God. I'm like, I'm honestly not. It's a struggle. It's going to be difficult, but I'm seeing some good things. Like I decided to start a nonprofit to raise money for people to have services for people with Parkinson's who couldn't afford it. And I organized a big bike ride across the state of Colorado. I was really active with the support groups in town. I was kind of like this new piece of my life that was like pretty interesting and pretty fantastic, because I love helping people, and suddenly here I can help people in a whole new way. And I met people I'd never met before. It was kind of really, it was like a neat new adventure in some ways.
Huh. Yeah.
And so spiritually, the first diagnosis was not that bad.
What? Why do you think you weren't mad at God? I think your therapist was probably just so used to like, here's the response that's going to come, here's the response that's going to come, that when it didn't come initially, that you must have been repressing it. What do you think? You know what I mean?
Well, I think I may have been repressing it a little bit, which comes out later. We'll get to that in a minute. I think it may have been repressing it a bit, but at the same time, it was also very early on in the disease course, so the symptoms weren't really affecting me much.
Sure.
Once I was taking the medication, it was like, I mean, you couldn't tell that I had Parkinson's. Nobody knew. Work was going well. Like I noticed that I'm like thinking like, okay, future plans. I may not be able to design stuff as well, but I like managing people. So, hey boss, I think I should be the manager of the software team. And he's like, sounds good to me. It works out. I needed
Right.
a manager anyway. And so I kind of got a promotion into that position. The career was going great. Loved where I worked. Family was going great. Everything was great. And I don't know why I wasn't mad at God. That's a really good question. I mean, it's not like you have to be.
Yeah, no, and I wondered if like, I don't know, maybe someone suffered next to you, so you had a category for like, yeah, I didn't expect my life to be perfect, and so this falls into my, like my understanding of God so far.
Yeah, I think that was part of it. I had seen other people go through difficult things and be stronger for it, or find different strengths.
Yeah.
And and I was worried about some of the future stuff, and so I talked to somebody else at church who kind of put me in touch with a guy who was a young onset Parkinson's person, and he was also like a manager, director, or something of somebody at like Intel, and he did fine, and he's actually the leader of our support group that we go to. Mm-hmm. Super cool guy. So I saw people who were handling it well, and I thought, I can do this. But the thing that hit me spiritually with that Parkinson's diagnosis was really more of people's reaction to it. In a weird way, early on in our podcast, we talked about things we accidentally learned. I think one of the things I accidentally learned was that health and wealth equals spiritual goodness in some way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. If you are a healthy person, if you have money or enough money, then that means that you are doing the right thing, and therefore God is blessing you. It was never explicitly said, but I just kind of got that vibe. And so here I was with serious health problems at 41 years old, and I, kind of goes through your head like, what did I do wrong? What should I have been is God punishing me for not being a missionary longer? Did I give up too soon? Have I done something wrong with my kids? Your mind goes to some weird places. when you have weird things that you've accidentally learned.
Yeah. Yeah. So were you having those thoughts before people around you were reacting?
A little bit, but then I had some, like, there's the one gal at church. She's like, well, I'm praying for full healing. I'm like, well, thank you. I'm just trying to.
That's not how Parkinson's works, but thank you.
Right. I mean, hey, God can do anything He wants, right?
Yeah.
But I said, I'm just really praying that God will help me accept this and turn this into something good for the kingdom. That's kind of where I had decided to put my thought process.
Yeah.
Outside of myself, and try to figure out how to turn this into a thing so I could be active for God. And her response was, well, you really should be praying for full healing. It's not quite the right kind of faith. It's not full faith, I think she said, to just pray for acceptance. You need to pray for it. I'm like, shut up. Tell me how to pray. So that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. But
yeah, you start to find the edges of our theology and what our beliefs actually are about that kind of stuff, and also the logical, like, when we're all doing okay, I think we tend to think like, I'm doing great because God is giving this to me because I'm good.
Yeah.
Even though it's just because we're rich and we're American and we
right.
live in a nice area. We were born in the right zip code. But when you've been in that for so long, you start to think you just deserved it. Like, yeah, I did this. God gave me this. That's the book with. That's the under posture where, like,
yeah,
it's that formula for we're ancient humans. We've got our crop that we're trying to grow, and then it gets struck by lightning and burns down, and then we're like, oh shoot, what did I do? Oh, it was that black cat that I slaughtered. I shouldn't do that again. Or and we just start to. Or like, man, I'm doing really well. What did I do yesterday? I did this dance, so I'm going to do that dance again. And it happens in Christianity where it's just like, I've had the same thing. Like, something went wrong. I must have done something to deserve it. Also means I think that I deserve the good things that happened to me. Right. Like I did something to deserve that. And that
it's a very transactional view of God.
Yeah. And it just doesn't, it works pretty well in the middle of life, in like the middle of the bell curve of life. But it really falls apart as you get to the edges of, let's just say, someone who's extremely wealthy and famous, or someone who is extremely impoverished. Our frameworks, if we apply those to those people, it shows the kind of the errors that don't come out in normal life, I guess. Yeah.
So, I mean, I honestly didn't get a ton of that kind of attitude from people at church. The church was very, very, very supportive and very loving, asking, like, bringing us food and stuff like that. It was really nice. But I wasn't mad at God through the beginning of it, because I think I was, like I said, I was focusing so much on back to your point about the With book. I was like, I'm going to plug everything I possibly can into the for God. I'm going to do everything for God.
Yeah.
Make this all about for God, which is, in retrospect, not necessarily emotionally helpful with something like this, because it really, when something comes along like this, it's seriously life-changing. There are some huge perspective changes and paradigm shifts. You start looking at everything differently. And granted, it's not like a serious cancer diagnosis where it's really dangerous and touch and go. Like, I know we have one fabulous listener in Oklahoma who is going through some really rough bone cancer stuff right now, and it's hard for her to deal with the chemotherapy and everything. And I also told myself that, I'm like, well, Parkinson's is not deadly. It's super inconvenient. And sure, I'm going to end up probably in a wheelchair or whatever. But that's like, 30, maybe 40 years down the road.
Mm-hmm.
And I found out that even though there's no clinical way to slow down Parkinson's, some evidence shows that if you exercise, that will actually slow the progression. So I'm like, I'm going to do that. So I began exercising a lot, riding my bike a ton, and it was great. I was getting in good shape, and honestly, I was in better shape than I had been in years, which aided to me feeling better about things and not being mad at God, etc. So overall, crappy, sucky diagnosis, very unsure, weird future, but I'm feeling great, right?
Right.
And things are going well. I raised a bunch of money for the Parkinson Association of the Rockies, like $20,000, and things were going good. And then we were coming up to this bike ride that I mentioned across Colorado. We were going to ride from the New Mexico border through the mountains to the Wyoming border, south to north. And as I was training for that, doing lots of long rides on the weekends and things like that, there was a bike ride in Denver, South Denver, called Pedaling for Parkinson's. And they were, it was kind of, it's like one of my friends calls it like a t-shirt ride. You do the ride to get a t-shirt afterwards.
Yeah.
And they were raising money for the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research. And I got involved with them. I helped them with their marketing, with their website, all that kind of stuff. And so I went down to Denver so I was really involved in the preparation for this thing. And I went down to Denver to do this ride. And the longest ride was a 60-mile ride. This is the second year I did it. And I went with a friend of mine, Matt, who also was going on the Cross Colorado trip with me. And it was hot that day. It was brutally hot. And this was 2019, like June. And the previous year, when we did the ride, there was like this one huge hill, like in Parker, Colorado, that was really, really hard. And I couldn't make it up the hill. I had to get off and push my bike up the last bit. I'm like, I'm not gonna do it this time. I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna do it. Because the route we planned to go across Colorado included going over the Great Divide like 3 times and some huge mountain passes. And so I'm like, I'm gonna do this.
Yeah.
And so I pushed myself super hard, and I made it over this hill. I was like so proud of myself at the end of the day. It was a great day, and went home. Woke up the next day, and I was sitting on the couch watching something on TV with the kids in the morning, and I noticed my left arm was numb. I'm like, oh, I must have slipped on my arm weird.
Yeah.
And then it just stayed numb, like really numb. Not completely dead, but like maybe 50% numb, I'd say.
Wow. Like
that really weird state where it's like kind of tingly, but anyway. And it just wasn't going away. And then I noticed that it was like kind of elsewhere on the left side of my body. I'm like, crap, it's a new Parkinson's thing. Because left side of my body.
Yeah.
Because Parkinson's usually starts on one side of your body, and over time it migrates to the other side as progression goes along. I also noticed that I couldn't, I went to do some push-ups in the morning, and I could only do 1 push-up.
Wait, what can normal people do? More than 1?
I'd been doing like 20 every morning.
Oh, what?
And I could do 1.
Wow.
It was a bit scary. So I got a hold of my Parkinson's doc, and I'm like, hey, what's going on here? And he's like, that's not Parkinson's. You should call your general practitioner. I'm like, okay. So I called her, and I got in and went to see her, and she, of course, I'm diagnosing myself along the way. I'm like, okay, this is not looking good. I went in, and she like poked me and prodded me and was like, can you feel this? Does the left side feel different than the right side and all that kind of thing? And she's like, well, we need to schedule you for an MRI because I think this may be a demyelination issue.
Demyelination what?
Demyelination.
Demyelination. I'm writing it down for later. I'll look it up later and pretend like I know what it means now.
I'll tell you what it means.
Okay.
In a second. And I had done the MS ride with my friend Chris in 2015. And he has MS. He's a high school friend. And along the ride, I'm like, tell me about MS. And he's explaining like, well, your nerves have this sheath around them, kind of like wires have a rubber coating around them.
Yeah.
It's the insulator. This insulator on your nerves is called myelin. And when your immune system attacks the myelin and starts stripping it off and killing the myelin, then your nerves are exposed to the rest of your body and the fluids and whatever else. And so if you have an inflamed area of your body, like swells up or something, then that the tissues inside your body press directly against the nerve endings instead of pressing against the insulator. And you get really weird, slow nerve transmission or no nerve transmission and things like that. So I knew when she said demyelination, I'm like, okay, this is like MS or something. Because I'd heard, Chris had told me about that. And she's like, MRI, that's the closest we can get you in is like a month and a half away. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me.
Yeah, I'll just not sleep for a month and a half and
right.
I'll be fine.
So I said, well, what if it gets worse? She's like, if it gets worse, go directly to the ER. Do not pass go.
Right.
So I said, okay.
But you had the CT scan earlier in the story and you were cleared of MS.
Right. And I forgot to mention, I also had an MRI. This is in 2017.
Yeah.
And because the first doc, the Parkinson's doc, wanted to make sure they didn't have some weird brain tumor, which that was a fun few weeks waiting for the MRI. Yeah. Like, do you have a brain tumor? Maybe. he like wanted to
goodness.
Like he's like you either have Parkinson's or a brain tumor. Pick one. But the MRI at the time showed nothing. It was fine. Fast forward 2 years later, almost exactly 2 years later, and the doctor's telling me that, well, it could be MS or something else because there are multiple demyelinating diseases. So I went home, and probably the increased stress of not knowing what was going on and having to wait that long probably kind of kicked off a chain of events that made it worse.
Right.
And so a few days later, I woke up, and it's like somebody had drawn a line directly down my entire body, and the left side had gone almost completely numb. I mean, it was weird. I could like run my finger across my chest, and like right at that spot, it would stop and it would be numb.
Wow. And
I was having a hard time getting up and doing anything with my arms. Upper body strength was like non-existent. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, okay, I need to go to the ER. So we went to the ER, and when you go to the ER, pro tip, you get an MRI right away.
Hey,
you don't have to wait. You don't have to wait a month and a half.
Yeah.
So I went in and got the MRI and laid there for a while, and the doctor came in and said, well, you got some like this lesion on your spinal cord, like around your neck area. And he's like, it could be MS. He's like, I think it's MS, but I'm not a neurologist. So there's like some specific criteria for MS. He's like, but one of the criteria is like, we need to analyze your spinal fluid. So we're going to do a spinal tap. Well, oh, great. And so had me lean over this thing and like stick a needle in my spinal cord and sucked out fluid and sent it off to a lab to see what was going on. And in the meantime, he started me on a 5-day round of super high intense steroids to minimize the inflammation, which worked to minimize the inflammation, but also I gained like 25 pounds of water weight during that 5 days and just felt like crap the whole time. And long story short, diagnosed with MS a few weeks later when the spinal cord stuff came back positive, showing multiple oligoclonal bands.
I'm not even going to write that one down.
It's like a protein in the spinal fluid. So here I am at this time, 43. And not only do I have Parkinson's disease, but I've got MS. And all the doctors agree there's no correlation between the two. One didn't cause the other. It's possible some people have had MS and then had lesions on the brain, the spot in your brain with it for movement, which ends up causing Parkinson's-like issues.
Uh-huh.
But I had it the other way around. So I had these two neurological, degenerative, incurable diseases. And what do you do? And that is when I got hit pretty hard with that's when things hit me hard. And that's when I started getting mad at God.
Yeah.
And that's also when the gal the Christian counselor we were seeing, we realized she was in over her head. Because she just did not know how to handle somebody with this level of issues. So we looked around and finally found the gal that we're seeing now.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I've always, especially being a ministry student in college and missionary and etc., I've had a lot of people over the years ask me questions about, why does God do things? And, I always had an answer.
Sure.
There's lots of answers you can give. But when you're actually in it, I actually am like, okay, why do bad things happen to good people? Mm-hmm. Now I'm one of those people, and I'm not an evil person. I'd already filtered through all the, did I do something wrong? I know I didn't, I'd processed through a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
And I was left at, why me? Why in the world is this happening to me? And then, is this God's will? And then, if God really can do anything, why the bleep doesn't he?
Right.
And then, people are like constantly praying for me, saying, we're praying for you, Steve. We're praying for you. And I'm still, thankfully, and I'm still on the prayer list at the church that I left. Mm-hmm. And so I'm thankful for people praying for me, but I start wondering, what's it good for? Why? Is it doing anything? Is it helping anything? Because I'm not feeling any different. My Parkinson's disease is still progressing. Every 6 months, I have to get more medication and up the pills. Like, I was taking 40, and last week I went to the doctor, and now I'm taking 44. Plus an antidepressant that I wasn't on before, because we realized that my dopamine was so low that it's causing depression issues with me and more motivation problems.
Right.
And
yeah, I mean, what do you
it's do? Like everything starts crumbling.
Yeah.
And I think this kind of did lead to some of the deconstruction that I'm going through now. It probably led to some of the acceleration of it. It didn't kick it off. I think I mentioned that kind of kicked off back in Germany a little bit. But I mean, even to be honest, even getting to the point where I'm like, does God even exist? I mean, it's the things that are going so poorly for me physically, and also the weird view of life as far as of Christianity, as far as it's for spiritual stuff. It's not a physical thing,
right?
Like, as long as your spiritual life is good, you're good. At least you know where you're going, right?
Yeah, disembodied brains with where heaven is just a place for the part of you that's not your body. Right. We're just in the waiting room.
Right. And so, and that, in a weird way, caused me to feel guilt about wanting my physical body healed, because I'm like, my physical body shouldn't matter. My physical being shouldn't matter, because that's not the important part. The important part is the spiritual, and I've got that handled, right? Checkbox, I was baptized.
How did we get... complete other episode, but how did we end up with that belief? How did we read the Bible and end up with that belief?
Right. That probably is a good episode.
How we got the gospel wrong for our whole lives, even though it was written down and we kept reading it over and over.
Right. Yeah, and so, I mean, it triggered a lot of the second diagnosis really triggered a lot of things, because I had all this momentum going. I had I sort of come to terms with the Parkinson stuff, and I had a direction. I was fighting. I had a nonprofit that I started, all that kind of thing. And then this came along, like literally when I was riding my bike for Parkinson's disease,
Right.
I get MS, which
Yeah.
really messes a guy up with wanting to ride his bike anymore.
Yeah.
Um,
And I feel like there's a progression from our tradition is very much centered in order and confidence and having all the answers. And then you are just someone who had, like, in our tradition, you're also just like even better at people at knowing, like figuring that stuff out and knowing the answers and working through it.
yeah.
But then once, that one domino falls over, what you move towards is like, you have this order, but now it's chaos. Like it starts to fall apart
Yeah.
where you have this confidence. And now it's like, I don't have any, like, what do I hold on to now? Like now is when I need something to hold on to the most, but everything I grab is dissolving. All the stuff that I've had my confidence in before, when I actually need it, is when I doubt that stuff the most,
Yeah. And the amount of platitudes that you get from well-meaning people, it's just insane. Like, well, God must have a really good plan for you. God must think you're really strong to give you this much hard stuff, I'm like, just shut up.
We're so bad. We're so bad at grief and mourning and unknown stuff. We just want to wrap it up in a bow.
Yeah. I want to do an entire episode on grief and mourning and how to deal with that and how to deal with other people really more than yourself.
And how not to.
If
you don't know
most
how,
of it.
but until we release it, if you don't know how, just don't say anything.
Don't say anything. Especially don't try to make it okay.
Yeah.
Because no matter how much positive could come out of this, it doesn't feel good when you're going through it.
Right.
So when I first started MS meds, they had me giving myself a shot every other day in my gut, basically. And that was before I went on the big ride across Colorado. So we didn't realize until afterwards. So the bonus side effect of these shots that I was taking was it made me feel like I had the flu every other day. Flu-like symptoms.
I was hoping you were going to say steroids that gave me like hyper athletic abilities.
That would be awesome.
So we didn't tell anyone. And
no such luck.
Rats.
So basically I rode across Colorado with Parkinson's and feeling like I had the flu every other day and MS. It was a hard ride, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, but fulfilling. And my wife, who went along with us, drove the car, kind of sag wagon.
Yeah.
She does not have positive memories of that, because every day at the end of the day, I was depressed and I crashed. And I'm thankful for the guys who went with us, your brother, one of them, and they were fantastic. At one point, we were in Breckenridge, staying the night. Right after we went over Hoosier Pass, which is a massive pass here in Colorado, and I was dead. I was just dead, and they put together a playlist on Spotify for me, like pump me up songs, and it was great because like they would ride next to me during the day and like play on the iPhone really really loud, like play the like Eye the Tiger.
Oh yeah, perfect.
And riding up Hoosier Pass, actually the day before, David Criswell, mutual friend of ours.
Hey, David.
Hey, David. David was riding next to me, right behind me, and he and his, another friend, Jacob Murphy. David was singing "Eye of the Tiger," and he's like, "Jacob, give me a beat," and he was singing "Eye of the Tiger" with like putting my name into it. It was very great guys, a lot of support. It's fantastic. But anyway, so I was taking this medication that made me feel like crap, and then I found out later that we realized that this medication was also causing massive depression for me, which was a side effect that they didn't expect. Because nobody knows what happens when you mix Parkinson's meds and MS meds. Because there's like hardly anybody in the country or in the world that has both of them.
Right.
So switch doctors. I'm on like my third medication now for that, and I'm taking like a shot once a month instead of every other day, which is nice. You know, all that stuff all wrapped up together, you know, the weird emotions that go along with it. I mentioned the curse of knowing the future, but also the desire to plan for the future more than you used to. Like, what if I can't work in 5 years, which is very possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because with Parkinson's, it's a known trajectory. It's like you plot 2 points on a graph and you pretty much got a straight line for the whole thing.
You can extrapolate.
Yeah. You know how slow it's going to go,
Yeah.
and where it's going to end up and when.
Huh.
With MS, I mean, I literally could wake up tomorrow and have to be in a wheelchair. I mean, you just don't know because it's an unknown.
So the uncertainty. So you had a bleak certainty in front of you with some uncertainty.
Yep.
So your negative. I'm making up terms for this. So yeah, you've got a bleak uncertainty, but with lots of certainty in front of it. But now you turn up the volume on the uncertainty part, and the bleakness. But
and the bleakness.
I don't know which is harder, the bleakness or the uncertainty.
Yeah,
for me, it's uncertainty. Yeah.
It's
I guess
probably
it depends on what you're measuring it against.
Yeah.
But wow.
Yeah. So I mean that. You know, what if I can't work in 5 years? Is my family going to be able to take care of themselves? And my job pays very well. I'm thankful for it. And so Chrissy has never had to get a job before. She's been, very active at church and doing stuff for the kids and stuff. But she's like, I probably had to kind of get into a career, so it changed her life. I've got weird guilt about being a dad with these diseases, and guilt with this disease is so stupid. I know it. It's not helpful, but I mean, I don't have the energy to go do stuff with my kids that I used to, or to go like be active dad,
Yeah.
And so that's weird. And I war back and forth between fighting back against this stuff and just giving in and going with it.
Right.
What does acceptance look like? Is there such a thing as acceptance? And, in my notes here, I wrote out, some spiritual impacts and some emotional impacts. But then I think the third point I have is like, is there a difference between spiritual and emotional, or should there be? And it kind of goes back a little bit to what we were saying about the separating the spiritual from everything else around you.
Yeah.
And I don't know that there should be, but it's been really difficult with, I think the hardest part with this whole thing is just trying to reconcile a good God and a loving God with allowing this stuff to happen. Because like I said, it's all academic until it happens to you. And when I figure that out, I'll let you know. But that's been the biggest single difficult part of this for me, I think. And figuring out what my life's going to look like in the situations that I have. And so, the side effects of it are that once in a while I will have like a really bad day, and I'll have to just kind of check out from work, and I'll have to take half the day off.
Yeah.
Fatigue is a huge problem with MS and Parkinson's, and I'm on medication for that. But at the same time, I sometimes I'll hit a wall, not literally, figuratively hit a wall, and I'll have to like lay down wherever I am. Like I came home from an event the other day, and I couldn't even make it upstairs. I just had to lay on the couch and sleep for a while. And plus, on top of it, heat is a really bad thing for people with MS.
Huh.
Actually, one way they used to diagnose MS before MRIs is they would stick you in a hot tub, and if your symptoms came back, then they knew it was MS.
What?
Because it causes in your body to kind of the inflammation response around in your entire body.
Okay, so all of your unsheathed nerves are being contacted.
And so I can't spend out hardly any time outside in the heat, or else my brain shuts down. I can't think, and then I have a hard time walking, and I start stumbling around.
Wow.
And on top of that, Parkinson's makes autonomic problems with your body, and so you can't tell when you're hot sometimes, and you can't tell when you're cold, and your body has a hard time self-regulating that. So I've got that on top of the So I'll be outside pulling weeds, and not know that I'm super hot, and I'll be like, it seems nice, and it's like 98 degrees. I'm like, what's the problem?
Right.
And then if I don't make myself come in like 10 minutes, then I will almost not be able to get up the stairs to the door. So I this is all bleak stuff, and I'm just kind of venting. You're my therapist. I established this, right?
That's what. Yes. How does that make you feel? I already said bad, Nathan. How would it make you feel? But part of the problem is like, how does this make you feel? The answer to that, like, even without any of us listening, going through what you're going through, we can be like, bad. That would make me feel bad.
Yeah.
But then when, like, even though we know that individually, corporately, when we get together in a church building, all of our songs are about how joyful we are and the peace that we feel and how great and powerful God is. Yep. And when you're sitting in that space and you just had a really bad day, how are you, like, or just like, the thinking through the, like you said about prayer, like, what is God powerful? Why doesn't he do something, Mm-hmm. So how do I pray or what should I pray for?
Yeah. It's like questions piled on questions.
Yeah.
And then this past, a few months ago, it was January or February, I think it was February, I had become so stressed out and overtaxed with church stuff and trying to deal with the way that some of the leadership was treating me and how they were behaving with some things. I got so stressed out that I ended up having an MS relapse. And the most common type of MS is it's called relapsing remitting, where it kind of goes in waves. Okay. Like you'll have new symptoms pop up, new lesions on your brain or whatever, and then they'll give you steroids and bring it back down. But I had a new relapse. Went in, and now there's not only that do I have a lesion on my spinal cord and a couple in my brain, but I've got a new, pretty big one on my brain stem, which is a really bad place to have it.
Yeah,
I mean, not that any place is good, but so it's like on top of it, it just the hits keep coming, and I think to myself, and I try to like segment parts of my life and parts of my brain as much as possible. Because I can't be thinking about this stuff all the time when I'm at work or trying to deal with issues at work. And I just can't dwell. But I to be honest with you, Nathan, it's been 2 years and some change since the MS diagnosis, and I'm still having a very hard time praying at all. Because I think I'm still kind of mad at God. And so I mentioned that to somebody the other day, and they're like, how? You're mad at God? What? And the response was, it was like, what kind of a person are you? It's been 2 years. I'm like, just, like insert cuss word here, It just made me so angry because, like, first of all, you don't know what I'm dealing with. And you can't tell, back to the what not to do when someone's suffering. Don't tell them how to feel. And so, I'm working through that and trying to, and this podcast is helping a lot in a lot of ways, because focusing on some of the topics we're focusing on and the focus on spiritual life day to day, and bring it back more to like real world stuff is kind of helping me see some of the connections and the differences and the disconnects, I should say, with how I've always processed faith and physical and spiritual stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so my faith, I feel, through this whole thing has, I don't know if I would say grown at this point. It's definitely changed. It's grown in ways I didn't expect it to grow. Because when I was younger, I always thought that growing in faith meant you knew more Bible, or you had gotten to the point where you were so good at convincing people of Christianity that you had baptized lots of people, or that you just were, just happy all the time. But it's not being happy all the time. It's going through some really crappy stuff and knowing, yes, kind of taking it as it comes. Like you mentioned last week, how faith is kind of opening your hands and accepting what comes.
Yeah,
and that's a lesson that I'm really learning hard way, but I'm really learning it. I'm thankful that I'm learning it.
I was just thinking that as you were talking about that, how I probably would have thought the same thing if I went back to like my college years, and the stronger faith is a higher, I would have thought of it as higher certainty.
Right.
That is so certain that it projects out. Like I just like at work all the time with my friends. It's
like never doubting, right?
Yeah, no doubting, but because I have all the, because I have more and more like a continuous building up of whatever it is, wisdom, information, knowledge, and certainty. And looking back, I equate that with a feeling of a tightening of a grip, like a strength. I'm a weak Christian right now. I'm going to exercise more, and one day I'll be a strong Christian. But my faith development has been a loosening. Like when I encounter somebody who has just gone through something, I don't have an answer for them. I would have in college when I was, 18-year-olds don't have any actual answers, but have an answer for everything. Someone's probably said that better.
Yeah.
I don't know. No answers, but a response for everything. I don't know. But I think, it can look like a faith that's getting weaker because your former self thought that faith is certainty.
That's a really good way to put it. That's kind of what I was trying to say. Is that faith has always been certainty for me. And I'm seeing now that faith in a lot of ways is being okay with uncertainty and being okay with not having answers. Because, let's be honest, even when we thought we had answers, we didn't have answers, like you were just saying.
Exactly, yeah.
It's not just 18-year-olds. I was 40 years old teaching classes. I had all the answers. I got the answers for you. And when people would say, "Why is there evil in the world?" I'm like, "I got an answer for that."
Right.
Going through this, I don't have a lot of answers, and I'm getting to the point where I'm kind of becoming okay with that. And I think that's kind of where I think I needed to go.
I like what you said too about starting to learn about the physical part of faith, the body part of it, where we're taught accidentally that the physical part of us doesn't matter.
Yeah. And
so there's that's just modernism or materialism.
Mm-hmm.
And so our thinking about like what depression is, we'll say like we should just be happier. It's like, well, what? Mm-hmm. Or even just what our hope for redemption is just like, oh, just think the right things, and then that part of you is going to go on. But faith is something that can be in your body, I think, or your expression of we are bodies. We're not a soul with a body. We're a body. We are just a human. I don't have the right words for that because we use these all differently, but a soul is a body.
Yeah.
Not a body has a soul or a soul has a body. That's maybe C.S. Lewis,
Well, Bible Project has a great video on that, by the way. The word for soul, how it's this Greek Western idea that we are like a vessel with a soul inside of it. That's not what the Hebrew scriptures teach. It's like
right.
the term for soul is like it's the whole person, and that's one thing that I've really learned. Speaking of brain chemicals, with all my brain chemicals being out of whack, I really. It's like I'm a sort of a different person when I don't have all these chemicals in my brain like I'm supposed to have. Because the self-starter, go-getter guy who I was before, I became this apathetic, sit on the couch, do nothing but play video games all day guy. And that's not me. And I'm feeling much more like myself now than I was before, thank goodness. But I'm realizing how much the physical body impacts the soul and your spirit, and how it's all one thing. We're one thing.
Mm-hmm. And so, how do we learn how to? You talked about the frustration of platitudes in church when you ran into that, or just maybe kind of hallmark theology that hasn't been thought through very, very well. Maybe isn't very deep, but seems like the right answer. But there's this weird thing too. Eye of the Tiger is the musical equivalent of a platitude. But when the people there were riding along with you, it's just different.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's one thing. Yeah, there's something to that. I think that there is such a thing as encouragement. And there is such a thing as hope and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
What is irritating, or just stronger than irritating, is false hope and shallow encouragement.
Yeah, and that's actually I'm glad you brought that up again, because that's one reason that when Jacob was given the beat and David was singing Steve right behind me. That was like in the moment they were saying, "You can do this right now."
Yeah,
we can make this. We can make it up this 11,000-foot mountain together. You can do it. Platitudes are saying it's gonna be okay.
Oh yeah,
it'll be fine eventually. We don't know what the plans God has in store for you. All this stuff, and that's one thing that I'm trying to learn. Think through the therapy and stuff as well, is I've got all of this uncertainty in this and the bleakness, but I only have right now. So if I hold on to that bleakness and the uncertainty in the future that may or may not happen the way I think it's going to happen, if I'm holding on to that future stuff, I'm not holding on to what's going on right now.
Yeah, the future is just stealing your present.
Right. And that's why David and Jacob were so helpful in that moment, because they're saying, you can do this right now. And that's what people who are going through this crap kind of stuff need to know is, let's just make it through today. I'm not promising that tomorrow is going to be better. I'm not promising that you're going to be around in a year. But today you're here, and you can do it today. Yeah. And that's the huge part of that's the one thing that I'm really learning. And on the spiritual side of that, I grew up my entire life constantly focusing on heaven, the one day thing. Make it through all this stuff here, and one day you'll get to heaven, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
But I'm realizing that, well, I still believe that, whatever heaven means. But all I know is that right now I'm living in the kingdom of God. And I need to act like I'm living there now. I don't need to wait. Why am I waiting to live in the kingdom of God? Right. My eternal life has started now. I need to act like it.
Yeah, that's hard to do. Not just, you could hole yourself up in a cave and wait for what's coming, but I think you would miss something. Where there's something for us here now, even when it's kind of sucks to be here right now. And I think there's something that I'm constantly having to fight that I have learned through stuff I've gone through, but I feel like more in 2020 than any other time. You mentioned just the idea of like just getting through the day, and when I'm sure you've been in times when I've been in times where my goal is 1 hour. I'm going to get through 1 hour, and if I get through that hour, then maybe I'll try to get through the next hour. And
yeah.
It's in those moments, I had people that helped me get through that minute or that hour or that day. But what I wanted was just for it to all be over. And that's still what I want. That's what I want. I always want, like, financially, just to have everything I need, pay off my house, do all my projects, and have no financial need, or like heaven, or getting through a problem. And that's because I had a theology that was, you just wait for the big lottery payoff at the end. But I don't think that Christians are supposed to help each other that way. And I don't think God helps us with this really frustrating thing with daily bread. And
daily, yeah.
Yeah, it's
like God, the manna. It would spoil at night.
You don't even have enough for tomorrow.
Right.
You can collect what you need just for this day. And God is like screaming in a megaphone. It's not the lottery. It's, I have not told you, if you be moral, if you don't cuss, this is what I believe. If you don't cuss, and you are respectful to women, then you will get a wife at the end of college. I thought that was the formula. I didn't know that you have to talk to women. You apparently have to talk to women.
Small detail, yeah.
Yeah, it was, if you don't talk to women, but you don't cuss either. So that, yeah, payoff theology. But God doesn't say, if you do these right things, you're going to get this great thing eventually. He just says, I'm here with you to walk through this right now. Yeah. And you'll get your daily bread. And what humans want to say is, well, can I have enough for today and tomorrow? Yeah. I'd prefer to just have a barn full of bread and not have to do that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make it easier.
No.
But I think it helps direct us as humans how to be humans next to other humans who are going through things.
Yep.
Which is like, well, what can you help them with today? What? And instead of telling Steve, don't worry, your legs were built for this mountain, or you wouldn't be on it. It's like, what? No. You may or may not be able to get up this mountain. So let's do it together and see if you can do it,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And all of this has brought about, it's forced me to make some realizations. I have a list of, like a partial list of forced realizations that I wrote out.
Undesired, unwelcome learning.
Yeah. You're going to realize this whether you like it or not. So I mentioned some of these already, just the brevity of life. Once again, I'm not dealing with terminal illnesses, but just the reframing of things, how I am dealing with loss every day. Some people refer to Parkinson's as the disease of loss, because each morning I'll wake up and I'll realize that my tremor is a little bit worse than it was the day before, or that I can't pick up things, like my fine motor skills are slowly deteriorating, things like that. So it's constant loss, but I'm realizing how much of a breath, how much of a passing breeze this life is. And so which helps me realize the beauty of life.
Yeah.
and realizing how much I can't control, and therefore helping me to release that control. Not to sound all Buddhist, but it kind of is.
Well, no, it's not just Buddhist. It's the Eastern religion of Christianity too.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I'm a guy who likes to control things. I don't know. My wife's listening to this probably, so she would have maybe have a different opinion on whether I'm a control freak, but I don't think I'm a control freak. But I like to control. I like to have. I mean, who doesn't like to have control of things, right?
Right.
And especially of your own body. But when I cannot control my leg bouncing up and down sometimes, it looks like I'm just like nervous, but like I can't control my leg moving sometimes, and I can't control my head like kind of bobbing back and forth like it is right now a little bit. I just can't. And so when you can't control like your hand, much less the things around you, it's a bit of a paradigm reset.
Right.
Realizing how much. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that this is a silly reference, but the Michael J. Fox comedy show, I can't remember what he called it, but 1 or 2 seasons of the TV show he had.
Spin City?
No, more recently than that. He was acting in it with Parkinson's as a news anchor who had Parkinson's.
Oh, right.
And the comedy is that he doesn't have control of his body. Like, I mean, That's just what every joke that's why it's only 2 seasons long. It was really funny, but but you can tell that lack of control in one area has made him into a person that is more okay shrugging off the lack of control in the other areas.
Right.
And it's the people around him that can't handle it. Like, they're in the same situation now. It's not his body, but it's those people that don't have the practice, like shrugging off the thing. You get like, yep, sometimes that happens.
Yeah, and it's a good point, because little things that, like, I can be in the worst traffic now, and I'm like, I'll get there. I hate being late. I spent just 3.5 years in Germany was enough to like cure me of ever wanting to be late ever again. So if I'm like 1 minute late, I'll be calling, I'm sorry, I'm late. And people are like, what?
Right.
But in general, I mean, even little things, like I'm able to shrug things off now that I couldn't before. I'm realizing how much I need other people, because I for not just physical things, but I mean, there are physical things that I can't do anymore as well. But not just for physical stuff, but for emotional support. I was always like very much a Lone Ranger type person, and going to some of these support groups and like therapy, as I mentioned, I need that. It's not just a luxury. I really need that stuff to stay sane. And realizing how much I need God throughout this whole thing. Because whatever your view is of God, it helps me to... It gives me great comfort knowing that there's something beyond me that, even though he's maybe not fixing me like I would like him to, I know that, or he or she or whatever, God, I know God is there, and there's this power that's greater than me, and that has a huge impact on my life. And just realizing how serious all this stuff is. Just life. The seriousness of life. It's easy to, especially when you're young, but it's easy to just kind of bebop through life and not realize how serious what we're dealing with is. But anyway, I love to have fun and things, but life it's some serious stuff going on, and also the invisible things that people deal with that you don't ever know that they're dealing with.
I was just going to ask if having something like this makes it easier to spot and sympathize with people who are going through something.
Oh yeah, 100%. Because I mean, the average person, unless you're a trained neurologist, you wouldn't know that I have Parkinson's most of the time. I know enough about it, and I've been around enough people with Parkinson's now that I can see somebody walking down the street and go, they got Parkinson's.
Wow.
But like my left arm doesn't swing hardly at all when I walk, because Parkinson's is on my left side, so my arm doesn't swing.
Right.
And my facial expressions are muted on the left side. They're not completely gone, but they're kind of less prominent.
Huh.
Like when I smile, I tend to smile like more on my right side.
Oh yeah.
Like I can do it both ways. But like if I'm not thinking about it, it's like just a right side smile.
Right.
Little things like that. But it has made me realize how many people, whether even if it's not something like a brain disease, but like depression and anxiety. These are some serious issues that are often chemical in nature. They're not just because you had a bad day,
right?
Or that you're like letting the devil in, which I heard somebody say recently. It's that these are hidden, silent, invisible diseases that people are dealing with, and just having. I'm defaulting to more empathy before anything else these days. And even when people are cranky with me or mad, I'm a lot less inclined to just bite back because I really don't know what's going on in their head or in their life.
Yeah. I think there are so many people, there are more people than we acknowledge going through stuff.
Mm-hmm. Oh, boy.
Sometimes it's, like fibromyalgia or Lyme's disease or some chronic illness that people don't see. But sometimes it's just like your family situation, or you're taking care of someone, or depression, or mental illness. I tend to think that just everyone has what I have, so I just think like maybe everyone's going through life with depression or with whatever.
Yeah.
So maybe I've got a false view of it, but I think way more people are going through this kind of stuff than like we talk about at church or that we have answers for. Like,
Sure.
why don't we have good answers for this? It's all of us. It's not all of us. It's some of us though.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the last things I wanted to say is that, I mean, my story is honestly it's kind of a bummer. Like when we talk to people who are, especially people in the medical field, when they hear that I have both issues, try as they might, they cannot hide the sadness on their face, and because they get it.
Yeah,
like one of these things is hard enough, but both of them, it's pretty brutal. But as bad as I have it, it's not a competition. I'm not coming on this podcast to say, hey, I've got it worse than people out there who are just depressed, quote unquote, just depressed. Because the hardest thing you ever have dealt with is the hardest thing you've ever dealt with.
Yeah.
And people can handle way more than they think they can. But just because someone's issues, whether it's physical, emotional, or whatever, are maybe not quote unquote as bad as Steve's, that does not mean that they're not seriously serious and life-changing and life-altering, and that they need attention. And so just, it's not a competition. I just wanted to tell my story about how this kind of thing can impact you and how it impacts me, because it does. It colors everything I do now. It colors everything that I say and think.
Yeah.
Because especially with Parkinson's, because every 3 or 4 hours I have to take pills. It's like I can forget about it, but then I'm like, oh, right.
Timer went off. My reminder that I have Parkinson's went off.
Time for 4 more pills. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Or if I forget the pills, then I suddenly I can't type. I'm like, why can't I type? Oh, right. Forgot the pills.
I think that humans' emotions, this isn't a completely true statement, but our emotions just fit the range of our experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so when a 4 or 5-year-old is throwing a tantrum because you can't find their blanket, to us we're like, it's just a blanket. But to them it's like they have just experienced a loss. Like, their emotion should tell you what they're going through, not how big feels relative to you.
Right.
Right?
Yes, perfect way to say it.
And Mr. Rogers was trying to tell us this whole time, like, just try to remember what it was like to be a kid, because it's one thing to throw a tantrum. Parents know how to tell the difference between a tantrum and when a kid is upset, but we tend to think you shouldn't be upset about that. It's small. Yeah. It's like, no, it's big because I'm a kid and I'm upset about it because it's big. And that's true with adults. You can certainly go through something that's harder than other people, but
yeah,
what you're feeling is still like your range of experience. That's what you're going through. And I don't know if you've gotten to this point yet. What you and I went through is drastically different, but I was grateful for having a slap me in the face kind of problem. Cause I needed a jolt kind of to wake up. But it also woke me up to other people's problems. And it gave me just, I guess, the looseness that we talked about and the humility to like actually see and notice other people's problems.
Problems really give you empathy.
Mm-hmm.
They really do.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm still on the journey.
Yeah.
Following the fire through the wilderness, trying to figure out what all this means for me. But I think I'm on the right path, and I'm feeling better day by day about stuff. And I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody listening has any questions about any of this at all. I've been very open with things the whole time, from the time I got diagnosed with Parkinson's and MS and everything, because I think I felt like I immediately felt the need for people to support me. And so that's kind of one reason I was so public about it, is just the support from all around the world of people that I know who've been able to help me out and help me keep going up that hill when it's hard, and, help me to realize that I'm not alone. And for the people out there who are dealing with hard stuff, if you need help, find help, and don't try to do this stuff alone. It's not worth it, and it's maybe not possible all the time to do it on your own.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like we could I feel like we could focus in on any one of the individual topics we just talked about. It's just like so deep.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's a good takeaway, that a lot of times this kind of thing, if you don't see someone around you suffering with it, or it feels small or whatever, or shameful or something, I think there's something evil that keeps us from each other, keeps us from sharing that stuff.
Yep.
Anytime that I have finally overcome either my pride or fear to share my burdens with people, it's always worth it.
Yep. Totally.
It's what people are for.
Well, that's all I got. Sorry for the heavy episode.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing, though. And hopefully we'll return to this, I'm sure, occasionally. And I never know. I want to wrap it in a bow, but that's what we just talked about. That there's no bow to wrap around it.
Here's what it is.
The saga continues. One day at a time.
There you go. The saga continues.
Yeah.
All right. Well, dude, I will see you next time, and have a good one.
All right. See ya.
And I had been screaming all these messages I thought you wanted to hear, but it only takes a whisper.
Hey, thanks for listening to Following the Fire. If you'd like to see show notes for this episode, which includes links to everything we mentioned as well as all the scriptures, head on over to followingthefire.com and just click on this episode. There's also contact information on the website. Let us know what you think about the show and if you have any suggestions for future topics. Also, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts if you could. It really helps other folks find the show. And as always, thanks to the fabulous Daniel Wheat for the theme song and the music for the episode. You can find more of his stuff on Apple Music and Spotify. See you later.